How's it going, everybody? I figured I'd take some time before things start really getting busy for me here to work on my attendance grade a bit and give you all an introduction to some of the stuff I've been learning um, in in the field I'm in. You know, shortcuts from people that know this stuff already and have been picking up some of those tools and tips and tricks along the way. So what you see in front of you is it's a Java FX application. So which has, since I took 230, it has been depreciated. So that's kind of unfortunate. Since JDK 11 in 2018, Java FX modules have been removed from the JDK. But and I once I figured that out, I tried to install some older versions, and now I have like 8 versions of Java on my machine. But I actually built this in Eclipse, but I copied and pasted it into JGrasp and got it working eventually. So I'll leave the link to that below, probably a Dropbox or something. And so the FX class essentially just runs the GUI, and I have 3 other classes for each of these 3 buttons. So if we go to GUI menu.java, see all these imports here for Java FX. A lot of these are just aesthetics. You can probably recognize button, label, password field, text field. Separator is just the line that you see there that makes it look pretty. So don't be frightened by all those import statements. And then obviously we have application and action event. So I don't want to get into the whole curriculum with you, but this is a class, and the start method from the application class needs to be overridden, and that's where you set up and instantiate all of your controls. So your username and text boxes and buttons, and there's a lot in the FX class that you can still use from the previous versions of Java. Yeah, and then all the event handlers are included, so you have to create subclasses so they override the handle action event. So whenever you click a button, you have to where is it here? You have to set on action for the button an instance of the class. So down here, these are the classes that fire when you click the buttons, and all they do is create new instances of these other 3 classes for MyHack, Google, and Wiki. I did some examples of this. So what I'm showing you in these 3 classes are different ways to utilize what's called Selenium. It's a product, it's the Selenium API for web drivers. So essentially you can get drivers for Google Chrome or Firefox or whatever you want. I decided to go with Chrome in this case. And the driver is an exe, and the Selenium API is a jar file, which essentially you have functions in Java that you call, and those functions in the API communicate with the driver itself. Like you have a driver for your printer, so when you print a page, it sends it to the driver, and the driver sends it to the printer. It's software that controls hardware, but in this case it's more software. But I think it's an interesting concept, so I'll give you the ones I've been using as well. This is the exe Chrome driver, and this is the Selenium API in Java that interfaces with it. And I will also be showing you how to link these to your program. So in JGrasp, you basically add it to your path for compiling, and you have a bunch of imports. So you import a bunch of different Selenium objects, and they're all different classes, compiled classes that are packaged together in that jar file. And the exe, like a C++ program, is an executable that I don't think it does anything if you just click it, but it will launch a Chrome browser, and this will communicate with it. So yeah, it's pretty fascinating. This is 100% legit, widely used. The Chrome driver from Google, it's official. This is the Selenium is probably the most popular. So they have Java, C#, Ruby, and Python APIs for not just the Chrome driver but different web browsers as well. I like Chrome for a lot of reasons. Probably my favorite feature is, if you've ever been here, you go to Settings, you go to More Tools, you go to Developer Tools, it'll bring up a page on the side here. So this is a big part of interfacing with the driver, is finding elements on the page that you want to interact with. So let me give you a demo of my executable jar file. So I have these 3 buttons. So I have username and password fields. So I'm just going to type those in. I have different passwords for hack and stuff. So I'm going to type in my username and password for hack and click the button, and it's going to launch an instance of the Chrome driver, auto log me in, and take me to the link that I wanted to go to after the fact. And this is programmatic, obviously, so I programmatically sent myself to the URL for login, and I know there's a tons of different ways to find elements in a website. So I found the username and password fields and sent a string version of what's in those text box to them, and found the login button and clicked it. And then you could keep going from here. You could activate this and go to different classes for any website where you have constant ways to access the WebElements is the class name. So this is for the whole internet, really, and I think this is important to know. If you know, you don't even need to know FX exactly, because you can just run JOption pane or whatever. GUI wise, I don't know what they're going to do next. I think actually JavaFX is being still used, so they'll create modules for it that you put into your bin for Java, so you might be able to use some of your older code. In any case, I guess I should just dive right into this then, because this is there's few times when, because we do a lot of work with text files and arrays and stuff, and that's good to understand the logic of everything and how to convert different kinds of data. But when's the last time that was done in a project where it wasn't transferred off of the machine that it was on exactly? So I think it's important to know what works in the real world, what's important. Not that this is in particular, but you can see here I can just log into Google this way, and if I had the time, I'd be making a more full-fledged application out of this. But sorry. Yeah, and you're probably wondering why Wikipedia is there, because you don't have to log in to Wikipedia, right? Yeah. So what I did with this one is it goes to wikipedia.com. I have a starting link, and every 2 seconds it clicks a random link in the body of the paper. So there's a few things. Eventually it gets caught up on like a wiki help page or something, and it can't find a link. And I have a couple ways of going around that, but I did this for fun. So it's really just going to keep going, and probably 10 or 20 minutes before it gets to a point where it gets lost or something. So yeah, so I'm going to go a little more in depth into the API and the use of it. I don't want to waste any more class time if you're watching this in class, so maybe watch it on your own. If this is something that interests you, or take the files that I've given you along with the video if I can find a way to copy it from YouTube. And you never know when you might need something like this, right? Because there's a lot of help for it online, because it's more widely used than I thought it was. I'm doing this for work, really, because we have a lot of data online that I'm supposed to use for analysis reasons, and it's ugly. It's just lines and lines of numbers and data. You can't see a graph or anything. you can download an Excel version of it, but it puts these headers in at random places, so you have, if you're looking at a lot of data, you can't really edit it in an Excel like you might think. And I thought, well, why not take the time to figure out how WebDriver works and download it, download the data, and then upload it into an array for programmatic use. So this was kind of practice for me. I still have to look into that at work. I just finished training, and I'm still learning names and faces and stuff. But along the way, I thought you guys might find this as useful as I did. So this isn't as optimal as it should be either, but it's just proof of concept, really. So I forget if I showed you yet, but these are the two files that you'll need. I will also be providing links for the chromedriver download that's easy to find, and the Selenium download for Java, which is easy to find. When you download the Selenium, you will actually get a folder, which is somewhere, it's here, that has a bunch of jars in it. You only need the one that says combined. It has all the classes. I think these are like really rare used type of things. So this combined one, either of these combined ones, preferably the compiled one, will be the one that you want to put in your project folder. When I made it in Eclipse, you can probably do this in JGrasp as well. I compiled the whole thing, including the imports, into a jar. So it didn't include the chromedriver because I have that in my program. I'll show you that then. But the Selenium WebDriver API aspects that I need are all compiled into the jar along with my project. So another thing I wanted to show you is how to run something, a jar or a .class file that is compiled Java. You get them automatically when you run it in JGrasp from a batch file. So if I click on the batch, my program pops up. So all you do is open a text document and type, if it's a jar, if you export as a jar, Java space -jar space, and then the name of it, .jar, and then save it as a .bat, and that's all you need to run it. If it's a .class, for example, I have an example somewhere of that. This might crash, but oh no, it didn't. Yeah, so this is the same thing, but it's all my .class files. So these are all compiled into a jar in my jar version of this, and the Selenium API is also in this folder here. So that's linked to the project from the imports somehow. I guess when you link it in JGrasp, the pathwise, it includes that into maybe your main class. So whatever your main class is, in my case, the GUI menu. That's what you're going to put. You don't need the -jar, and you don't need the .class. You just need Java, and then just the name of the .class of your main class, and that will create a runnable batch file for which you can create a shortcut. Put the shortcut on your desktop, and you can right-click it and change the icon of it to whatever you want if you really like the way that looks. So that was something neat I thought you guys might want to take a look at. I don't know how much I covered up what I was trying to show here, but we'll get right into the code after all that, huh? So this I showed you is just the GUI. So I don't know if you're going to learn that anymore in 230 or not, but it's pretty cool to be able to make a lot more complex things with that. Canvas drawings and animations and images and media and whatnot. But I don't know what they're going to replace that with. But I also have a function in here called login, so if those text boxes are empty, it gives you an error message. If not, it returns true, and it saves the class members, which are string user and password. It saves the contents of them to those two values, and those are the only things that the subclasses need. So right here, string username equals user. So if you were to take this single myhack login and turn it into a JOption pane version of this, that would throw an error. So you would replace user with JOption pane dot show input dialog. Please enter username, and let me think what else. You might need to copy and paste some of the imports, but it looks like everything you need is here for this. And like I said, it creates new instances of the classes if you click the buttons. And Wiki doesn't need the login authentication. So I'll start with my hack because that was probably the easiest. So how do you implement this, right? So this isn't what I want exactly. So we're going to turn this into a show input dialog program just to understand the fundamentals of utilizing this API, right? So there's one line in the parent class that needs to be transferred. So your inputs here are, or your imports are org.openqa.selenium.me. Here's what I'm going to go over first is how to link it. I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. You got to go to settings, class path, it's all caps, people use that a lot, workspace, class paths. Let me zoom in here. So you want to be under class paths. You want a new one. It says directory path or jar file. So the jar file contains all the Selenium classes that we're going to attempt to import into this single class we're going to run here. So we're going to browse for wherever we have it from where we downloaded it, and that's where it's going to look pathwise for it, so we don't want to move it from there after the fact. So I put it in demo, I think. That one works. Choose. OK. Apply. OK. So that should give us all the imports that we need. It's not going to ask us where those are now, assuming you use the same file that I upload below. Just remember to do that quick. So public class, we want to get rid of extends. So this is no longer a subclass. This is our main primary single function. Single class, my bad. And this needs to be after this. So first thing we have to do is set a system property, which I don't want to get too much into that. I'm not that knowledgeable on the subject, but I think it sets the system path for where the WebDriver that is being asked for is. So where this project is, like where this project is saved, there's a folder called WebDriver, and in it is the chromedriver.exe. So the selenium.jar gets imported at the top for use as a Java API, and the chromedriver is linked via its path location in correspondence to the driver program that you're writing. So however they're related to each other, you don't want to be moving them in and out of folders. So I would recommend putting them in a folder, creating a batch file, and then maybe if you put everything in your documents or something, and then put the shortcut on your desktop, or however you want to do it. You know, if you know, assuming you want to use this, right? So then we have to create a WebDriver instance. So you could do a couple of them. You know, that would be different windows. That would be multiple windows of Chrome opening. If you look more into the API, which I'll show you after this, you can do different stuff with tabs. So you can do tab management. We're going to do one driver, which is going to open one tab for now. Public, this needs to change to static main, public static void main, string args, and then we're just going to call this URL. So you can see I have expected title, so that's the title of the web page at the top of the tab. And down here you can see actual title, which is a blank string, equals driver.getTitle. So getTitle is a function of the WebDriver class that returns the string title of the web page from the HTML source. So we're creating that string, and then we're doing validation to make sure that the actual title of the web page is equal to what we expect it to be before we run anything else. You could throw it all in a try-catch block. If you don't know what that is, you haven't taken 230 yet, it just catches an exception and doesn't crash the program if an exception happens. So we're going to get rid of that if statement because it's not 100% necessary in my opinion. And the website title has changed, so we can just get rid of that and get rid of actual title and get rid of all that. So now we just have our URL as a string, and then driver.get. So driver.get accepts a string that is URL, and it sends the current tab in the driver to the URL that you send it, which in this case is the hack login that I chose. This particular link, after it logs you in, for me at least, takes me to the content page of CPS 162 for this instance of the class. So you can change that, but keep in mind some of this might change. So down here is where this gets a little bit less simple and a little bit more of not a science. So first I'm going to create our username password, pane.show input dialog, syntactically maybe, please enter user, and that returns a string, right? So that our string is going to be whatever we enter for that pop-up. Please enter password, and we'll probably get some errors here. So I already have this made, but we have driver.findElement by ID, and that's the username element with a capital N, and then the function of the element is send keys, so we're going to send our username to that. So how does this work exactly? It looks pretty straightforward, right? Driver find element by ID, and then dot send key. So we're going to send the string into the username element. Well, I already found the username with the capital N in the website, in the source of the website, and that was the ID of the particular web element that I was trying to send the keys to. So there is a class hierarchy here that needs to be understood to utilize this driver, and it is, once you understand that, everything else comes pretty easy after it, because you have elements, and those you have functions that you can apply to elements, and then you have basically how do you find the elements. So I have a text file that kind of explains that. So our main class is the WebDriver class, and you can explore those links. Those links are to the full API site. So this is the WebDriver and all the main functions for it. And then the subclass is a WebElement. So there's WebElements in a WebDriver, and the functions for that. And then by. So by is just a class that they made that has subfunctions: class name, CSS selector, ID, you've seen, link text, name, tag name, and XPath is great. They're all really convenient ways to narrow down to a specific element on a web page. So the driver will automatically find all the elements on the page, and you kind of have to sort them, or find the specific one you want with the by methods. So driver dot WebElement, and then the WebElement functions you want most often are definitely going to be find element, single element, or find elements, parenthesis, by dot, by class, by ID, by whatever. And there's a lot of stuff here that you can go through, but right here is a WebElement dot click is a function of WebElement. So if it is clickable, and you call dot click on it, it will simulate a click on the WebElement. So yeah, so I have a text file here of the main functions that I used to create these programs to show you. There's some more complex ones in there, but you can do a lot with what's right here, right? So WebDriver.get accepts a string and sends the current tab to the URL of the string. Get current URL returns the string of the current URL. Get title returns the string of the current title, which would be like this right here. Just WebElement would be the title of this web page. WebDriver.close closes the tab. .quit closes the whole driver, which, you know, I think you should call that as well, even if you only have one tab open, just so it erases the instance of the driver from your task manager, because I had some problems with that continuing to run when I just ran infinite loops on Wikipedia. And then a subclass of WebDriver is WebElement. So WebElement has a lot of functions you can go through here. You can get the CSS attributes, the location in pixels, size, rectangle, pixels. You can actually, I think, you can just get a picture, like a screenshot of that, of the element on the page. So if you have everything's an element. We'll get to that next. Get text. These are good. Is displayed is a boolean. Can you see it? Usually if that's false, you don't want to try to modify it. Pretty much everything that's displayed is what you're going to want to interact with. I've never interacted with something I couldn't see on a website. Is enabled is basically the same thing, but you could ask both of those in an if statement before you try to enter text or something. And send keys and click are what you're going to use to input your username and passwords, and click buttons and stuff. And you can also do send keys, and there's an enumerated type for keys like Shift, Control, Alt, and Enter. So those work. Excuse me, those work a lot. And then the by class, I might have already said, is just they used it so your code read more logically. Like if you read it, it's driver.element find element by class or CSS or ID or whatever. So it logically makes sense when you read it, type of thing. I also have a website that has a top 25 most used functions for Selenium, which is way more in depth than I went in my examples here. So you know, you could give this a look through and start playing around with it, and pretty soon you wouldn't believe how many applications it has. You know, you could auto log in to everything you need and go to all the websites you usually go to, and go right into Netflix and start watching TV or whatever you do on a daily basis. You can make your life a lot easier with this if you take the time to learn it. And I just think it's worth it because it's going to continue to exist, you know. Even if you use a different language, the API is pretty much the same across languages, and there's always going to be a GUI you can use with Java anyway somehow. So I thought this was worthwhile to show. So there's an overview of the things you can do with the three main subclasses of the API. Obviously it's huge, so there's all kinds of stuff in here, but like timers and Java already, you know, it's implemented specifically for driving websites. So I'll give links to this as well, because, you know, it is helpful to know everything you can do with a specific object. So yeah, so how did I find username in the hack website? because we have our driver object that we instantiated right here. Set property, and then we create a WebDriver. Before, this doesn't even need to be here, so we can do this all in our main function. I'm sorry. Create a new driver. Go to the ehack URL right here. So I got to use this specific one to find the element I want. Usually you can just try ID or class name and username and password with different caps lock combinations and find it without even looking. But I'm going to teach you how to look for it, because you kind of got to dig. Through the developer section of Chrome, I guess. So we have our J option panes to enter our username and passwords. We have driver. We're going to call find element. We're going to find a single element, and then by. And I didn't know I wanted to use ID until I found the element on the page. So how do you find an element on a web page that you want to interact with, right? It's like the main point of this video is how do I get those there without Chrome doing it for me already? I mean, there's a lot more you can do than autofill, passwords and stuff, but that was an example I decided to use. So we're going to more tools, developer tools, and this is the whole source code for the HTML page. But you can see it's all collapsed, so these down arrows will drop out different sections of the page, and it highlights a section of the page that is contained inside that drop down arrow. So we want to, I might be covering that up though with my camera here. We want to go through and find the part that highlights the section we want. So we want D2L page main. You got to dig, so we're going to keep digging. And then we want this one, and then we want this one. We're going to keep going down the chain. It's definitely not a stack exactly, but can we go deeper? No. So we can't go deeper. Sometimes you can, but you find, if you see input type, that's probably what you're looking for. So this isn't an exact science. There's, in a lot of web pages, you could interact with just something in the area and still get the keys to be sent to the text field, depending on what kinds of HTML scripts they have implemented. But we have input type equals text, D2L edit, ID equals username with a capital N. So ID is almost always explicit to that element of the page. So right there, if you see ID username with a capital N, that's when you would want to try plugging that in. Right here I have get elements. I'll show you in a bit. That's a tool that I use to find all the elements on the page. So you can look through those, or you can add to that for loop that goes through the array, filter by what you want to see if it is what you want. But it was username with a capital N, and then the password ID was just lowercase password. I found it the same way. And the button, I went by class name. So let's say we're trying to find the button here, login, login. Log me in, man. Button, primary class equals D2L dash button. There's an ID there too, so you could have done by.id and plugged in that long thing. When I see like big links, huge long links of numbers and letters and stuff, usually I'm reluctant to use those because it looks like they could be automatically generated. They could be subject to change in the future. Even if they did an overhaul to Hack's website, D2L button might stay the same. Probably will stay the same for the foreseeable future. Also, you might be wondering if Chrome updates, what do I do? In that case, it should be fine to just download the new chromedriver.exe for the new version of Chrome. The one I'm using and providing for you is applicable to the most versions up to the newest, but you could download the latest release and paste it right into where the old one was in your folder, and that would probably just work fine. So yeah, there's multiple ways to find the same thing in a page. So I'm going to go over the rest of those. Obviously, class, HTML class, which is used to interact with CSS for styling, and ID are pretty good. Class sometimes is for portal footer. I mean, that's probably just the one element, but sometimes class is used for many different elements. In that case, it'll return the first one it finds, first one on the page. So you got to be a little more specific. So we got to use some more of these by. CSS selector. There's usually a specific one. There's a lot of CSS selectors. So if I just type that in, I think it's W3 schools will provide all the different ones you can do. So when I did my Wikipedia one, I did something like this. Div is greater than P rather than div space P, which selects all the P elements inside div elements. This one selects all P elements where the immediate nested parent is a div element. So you can put all these in quotes as a string into the by CSS selector function and get those specific web elements. So if you have a link on a page, link is open bracket, it's not a bracket, whatever the little less than sign is, A, and then the link href on a page. With this one, you have different ways of selecting those links. So I used that as well in the Wikipedia to test, and in my get elements, I used by CSS selector. I just put an asterisk in there, which is like running it wide open. It just selects everything. And there's all different things you can go by for that one. Link text you could also do with a CSS selector, because you have right here is your way to weed out different kinds of links. Actually, you might have more options with the link parameters for CSS selection than this, but probably not since they put it in there. By name, some HTML elements it'll just say name equals because they wanted to name it for link to a JavaScript injection or something. You can do that with this. You can just run JavaScript. I was never a big fan of that. I'm sure somebody is, but if that's your thing, you can jump right into it. Partial link text tag name is an HTML element. An XPath is a big one. So class name, CSS selector, and ID are huge, and name you'll see sometimes. And XPath is huge because for a lot of things, if you see something and it has very little ways to identify it. So this one has a primary class and an ID. We could find it by its ID for sure. This is a login button if you wanted to. But if you right click it, in the, what is this? What is this called? In developer tools, in the source code, right? If you right click it, go to copy, down here at the bottom it says copy XPath, and the XPath is almost always explicit to the item. Just be careful that you're using the right item, because there's so many different parts of this HTML that you have to copy the XPath of the actual button and click it for it to work. Otherwise it'll just click whatever the padding around it or something, and that'll throw an exception because the driver, it doesn't make sense to it. But for most of these things, you can, if you think you found it, copy XPath and then by dot XPath dot XPath. API told me the capital was where. This is another reason I like Eclipse, because you can see all your functions and you can automatically import what you need, that kind of stuff. You know, you don't have to search for your syntactical needs. By XPath. Capital X and a P, and I don't know why there's an extra by in here. That was not a part of the API that I downloaded. I must have, they must have updated it or something. I don't know. This worked pretty well for me. So another thing you'll see with XPath and CSS selectors a lot is quotes. So if you remember, you have to throw a backslash in there to cancel out the quotes within quotes for a string. But that should be equivalent to the button, right? So the XPath, if whatever that is you can see it says @ID, might be a CSS link or something, and then that might be the same ID that we saw in the source. So there's so many ways to find one specific element. So if we want to find elements, this would still probably just find one. But you can create a list of web elements and then go through the list like an array, if you want to do that way. So that is something I did for Wiki as well. So keep watching if you want to see a little more of a tutorial, I guess. We don't need expected title anymore, and we don't need error checking. And if everything looks right, it's like, wow, this program got shorter, right? Everything's imported, I guess. This won't run on the first try, I doubt it, but let's give it a shot here. Oops. And illegal start of expression, because we originally had this as a subclass of a GUI class. There's a lot of ways to pull that off, but that was the easiest way, I thought. Cannot find symbol XPath. Cannot find symbol XPath. Lowercase x and p. Whoops. Okay, so it looks like it's running the Chrome driver. Takes a few seconds. It takes longer in the debugger than it does as a compiled class. For whatever reason, couldn't tell you why. And it should take us, boom, there's our input. So we're gonna, and we don't know, because I changed some of the paths for these elements, we don't know if it's gonna work yet. So you always test. You might find the program I included helpful to loop through elements. But we're just gonna give our shot with our username, and I'm gonna hide this from you. Clicking OK, and we got an exception. So this is good. It's good. I just want you to see how these exceptions work, because that's how you're gonna debug. Exception in thread, unable to locate element by XPath selector and our ID. So usually that works fine. I don't think it's formatted incorrectly. Okay, we can probably go back to whatever it was then. Sometimes you got to try a few different things, So class name was D2L button. Try this one more time here. I have XPaths running in some of the other ones, so And that's how I did it. I just copied and pasted it over and got rid of the quotes that were internal. I'll take a look at it then. It didn't look like it changed to me, but I'm gonna give this one more shot. Uno mas. I was hoping this wouldn't be too boring of a video, but I do think it's useful, and it's exciting to me when something finally works after, you know, an hour of wondering why that exception was raised in the first place. Okay, we're in. So it took us right to this link, and then if you wanted to keep going from here, you would do driver.getTitle, and if that matches what it's supposed to be, what it was before I closed it, you know, hack post login or content, because the content page or whatever it was, if that's the case, then you know you made it in. Or you could check an element on the page that you want to be there, because that's the next element you want to click. So you just do another driver.findElement or findElements, and then you have your function send keys. Click. Yeah, you can send arrow keys, so you could interface with even applets, like Java applets on other websites. You know, that applet is nested in the HTML as an HTML element, so you could find it that way and interface with it that way. You know, even things you wouldn't think, right? So Google was a little more complicated. We have two more imports: expected conditions and WebDriver wait. I just copied and pasted these from Stack Overflow, so you know this doesn't need to be this long, but it creates a second WebDriver with whatever input parameters the constructor needs, and then driver.until expected conditions presence of element located. So until the password field is present, and until the password field is visible. So it has to be present and visible. And I guess it checks every 100 milliseconds. That would be my guess for that number, but I'm not sure. And then it creates a web element. So driver.findElement by XPath. I actually found that XPath right there. So that is input at type equals password. That you could probably copy and paste for a lot of different websites. But you know, the reason we needed to do this for Google was, if I log out of Google, log out, sign out, Google login, sign in. I type in this. You see how I did a little swish thing there. So that is you know, it looks immediately for the new elements, and the elements aren't present until the animation is over. So it needs to wait for that animation to be done before it can find them. It'll raise an exception if it can't find, you know, that XPath. So it waits until that's there, and then it creates it, and then it sends the keys of the password string into it. And then password next is the ID of the button, and this is just input validation and some more input validation. So yeah, this is still a subclass. If you want to convert it, essentially it will just run. You could turn it into a JOption pane, just like my hack, right? So, and then the wiki one was in depth logically, right? So I have you could turn this into the public static main base URL. I started at the Wikipedia for everything. You could put any Wikipedia in there, any link to a Wikipedia page that you'd like. Because I turned off input validation, that if statement basically, and it just goes to that link first, driver.get base URL, and then you see we have this function click next. To click the next link is what I wanted to call it, while true. So it just runs. And obviously we have thread sleep 2 seconds. We also have driver.manage.timeouts.implicitly wait 1 with time unit of seconds, and that's an import up here, I think. Time unit, and I guess that came in with driver, that member function. So I think that will wait implicitly. I think that means it'll wait up to 1 second for the web page to load. So if it loads faster than 1 second, it'll immediately try to wait 2 seconds. So you have 2 seconds to look at the text on the page, and it has up to 1 second to load the page for you to look at. So if it loads faster than a second, you're still only going to get 2 seconds to look at the text, right? So that was my thinking from wherever I saw this. Play around with it, I guess. That's how I've been learning. So you can tell it's kind of turned into a lot of copy and paste. my tab indentations are awful. It's brutal to look at, but I have another IDE for a different language that every time you type a logical a keyword that you would usually indent, it automatically does all your indentation and doesn't let you change it. But I like it because you're always looking at the same indent structure. But I'll go over this briefly. This is actually the main part that I wanted to show you here. So list is a Java util, right? So you don't need to download anything to import it. It's part of the Java JDK importables. There's a name for those. I'm sure they're included in your Java downloads because they're so often used. And list can be instantiated as an array list, a vector list, a linked list, all different kinds of lists on top of that, right? So the list class is probably big. It's probably not as lightweight as an array list or even a vector, or especially a linked list. It's bigger, heavier, probably takes a little bit longer to run. It's fine. There's also a way, because you can see I created a list of WebElements, temporary TMP1 and 2. I could have named them something different. And then driver, I named driver. It's an instance of WebDriver. In every program, I've just named it driver. Find elements, plural now. By.css selector. This one we're going where there is an element, a link element, directly nested inside a paragraph element of HTML. So there's a lot of those. That turned out to just be the body of the Wikipedia. Links in the body. So that included the header links and the footer links at the bottom. And I also included by CSS selector where the link starts with /wiki, so it's a link to another wiki page. That excluded all external links to external websites that you find often on Wikipedia. And then what I had to do, because I didn't want to do them both at once, which there is a way, I think it's new, by chained, and then inside by chained you do your different by statements and it sorts them. But I was having problems with that. I got it to work eventually, but the main issue is it took like 10 to 20 seconds to do that, to sort through all my multiple parameters that I passed to by chained to the instance of that class, which you have to import separately as well. So that would be by chained up here. So what I did, I created 2 separate arrays, which they're not really arrays, they're array lists. So you can still get the index and remove index, or add. So you can add at the end, or you can add by index, right? So I just did add, so it appends it onto the back of the array. So we have 2 for loops. One of them goes from 0 to the size of array 1, and one of them goes from whatever position the for loop for array 1 is at, so j equals I, whatever I value is, to temp2 size. So we're getting a chance to compare every individual element of each array only once. So we have temp1 array1 dot get I, so the index position I for WebElements for the first array, dot equals, remember we're dealing with WebElements, which is a class, so if they're, you can't just see if they're equals, you need a function to test if they're equals, which is included in Selenium. And if it equals 2, then we're going to add that web element to the third array that we created that was empty to start with. So it gets all the elements on the page that are part of this, compliant with that rule. There's a better way to put it than that, but you know, whatever methods of finding that you use to narrow down your elements, you can get all of them in different arrays and then sort the arrays to find the ones that are matched on all the arrays that you have. So that was the quickest way for me to do it. It worked with the included by change method, but however they did it, mine was a little bit faster. It was probably my fault, right? Like I don't know the whole API. I just wanted to get this working. And then we have the implicitly wait until the page is loaded up to a second. And then if you're doing thread.sleep, you have to put it in a try catch. At least in Eclipse I did. I copied and pasted it from there, but there's a chance that throws an exception if something else more important is running. Your system will prioritize it, I think. And then yeah, that doesn't even need to be there, but you know, it just won't crash a program. You know, it'll run, you know, 2 milliseconds after that or something. String base URL equals driver dot get title. Why does that need to be there? I'll look into that later. So I created a random number from 0 to, if you remember this format for randoms, from 0 to temp.size, which is the total of elements that fit these two conditions, is the word I was looking for. These two conditions is what we narrowed down our elements to, a list of elements, or array list of elements. And then, you know, we take a random number as an integer that will be an index somewhere in that list. And then this is a little unnecessary right here, but for try, I have a try catch because this can all throw errors when you're trying to find what can actually throw errors here. When you're getting a URL, I guess sometimes, you know, I'll make this brief, right? So I gave myself 10 tries. So while temp.get random num .get text .index of. So this takes away all the references links. So there's links inside the body web page of Wikipedia to reference the references, like the sources. It's getting hard to understand, right? But they all have brackets. So I found all of the parts of the how do I word this? All the elements that had brackets in them. So essentially what I did is I excluded all of the reference links at the bottom of the page, and I made sure it was displayed. If it took me more than 10 tries to click on a link that took me to a different page, or to find a link that fit this condition or something, then I just went through the whole array and tried every single web element of the array. Whenever we found one, we clicked it, and then we went to that URL, and if the URL opened another tab, which did happen sometimes, we close it, and then we go back to the original URL that we were on and try a different. I guess that just whiles again and tries a different link on the page, which works eventually. So it can get complicated. You know, a lot of this was copy and pasted and logic that I did late at night, just trying to learn everything that I didn't fully understand. But you know, that's, if you want to learn on your own, sometimes, you know, you have to fail before you succeed. But when you know, if you're just trying to make something simple, or put a program together that launches all your daily functions, so they're ready for you where you want them to be, you know, even if you invest an hour or 2 hours into modifying this and going through the stack on a page. Go to DevTools. For example, this is a Google page. They have a different system. You know, their stack. This is a big, like, this is like a wall. I call this a wall. You know, it's like I felt like I was just digging into it forever. You know, like just kept going down and down into the depths of it. Like it doesn't stop. Keep going down. Like, look at this. Like, this has to be the smartest human being I've ever seen. You know, whenever you click forgot password, you're gonna send, you know, RCUQ, and you're gonna pass Hijibib into it, and you're gonna pass that, and this dude was probably like, huh, this is an integer, this is the double that interacts with that. As long as we pass all 15 of these easily memorizable functions within the same 15 nanoseconds, the central mainframe is gonna, you know, run its regular diagnostic, and just, you know, just keep going down deeper. You could call it a stack, right? Is this a stack? I guess it's a stack. It's an HTML stack. Into the stack. The depths of the stack here. Div ID equals password. I didn't think it was that easy. I thought I tried that and it didn't work, but maybe I just don't. Input type equals password. So I had to go deeper than I thought I would have thought. So input type, that's usually where your text field is, and that's what we used. I think our XPath we used. In any case, you know, there's you just got to use what's highlighted and dig down into it, and there's a lot of ways once you get to here to access this particular web element is what it is, and send keys to it or click on it or apply any of the other web element functions onto it. So, and also there's down here at the bottom in the source explorer, there's some CSS elements that you can use. So if it says it inherited from this div, it's a subclass of that, so you're going to get multiple elements if you use this thing here as a class to find elements. But usually you have whatever this class is, that might be particular to it. So, but you could use the class. I think you just do dot class as CSS class selector, whatever that was on here. These are all your CSS selectors. So there's a lot of ways to find elements, and there's a lot of ways to interact with them. And I hope this gave you a good overview of that, you know, of that methodology that you can use at your disposal with Java to programmatically and systematically browse the web, you know. And I mean, interacting with the internet is, you know, if you haven't read this yet, you know, be starting chromedriver on port only local connections. Please protect ports. If you have a Windows firewall, it's just like launching Chrome, you know. But you know, you wouldn't want to go to a sketchy site on Chrome and start clicking on a bunch of ads. You know, I mean, you know, that's, you could do that, right? So be careful there. And I also have this here. It's get elements. So yeah, you just You can put in any link to any web page you want, and it'll go to that web page. Create a list, driver.find elements, plural, by CSS selector, and if you remember, the asterisk just takes everything. So this list is every web element that it could find on the page. And then for I to size, if it is displayed, I should add and.is enabled in there to make sure it's enabled. I think you need both. It's going to print the tag name, which I think you can access stuff by its tag name. Class attribute, which if you do get attribute, you can put more than just class in here, so you can feel free to look into that. CSS value display, you can get all different kinds of CSS values. It's kind of like reverse engineering the CSS selector. So instead of saying I want everything that is a div and a link or whatever, I want to see if that's true or false or something, or get color, so it would return the color, right? So you can get that kind of stuff. Class, I don't think that's the class you think it is. You have different classes in HTML and CSS and stuff. Perhaps you could still use the whatever this returns to access a web element. You can go ahead and try it. And size is just aesthetic, how big is it? And text, so if it's a link, it'll give you the actual link that has a hyperlink attached to it, or the actual text that has a hyperlink attached to it. So it'll be underlined in blue, usually like on Wikipedia or something. So I've updated this a bit. I added some try catches, so it automatically catches exceptions if something from the web page disappears, because it gathers everything it can. And I also added a function to test if a particular element exists by passing the string name of the element as the ID. But you can change this line here and make any kind of statement you want to search for one element in particular, and it will return true if that element exists. And you can do whatever you want with that here. And before that, it prints out every element on the page it can, which is a really long list. Right here we have, class attributes to search button. So that's probably a way to find the search button on the navigation bar for DigiKey. So I just ran get elements. It's the only class. There's no subclasses or anything tied to it, and I'll separate everything out as an individual class, so you can try all the buttons separately. It takes a while to load up here. But yeah, that will be below in the description, I guess, if I put this on YouTube. So here we go. Sometimes it just shoots out text, because that's all it is HTML text in a paragraph or something. There's nothing tied to it in any way. If there is, it'll print the rest out. I think that's what's happening. It delays a little bit, so it'll delay a couple seconds, then it'll continue to print. Another thing I forgot to show you was you can go directly to the source of a page. If you want to see the full source, you just right click it, view page source, and boom, you get a wall. So depending on what kind of website it is, this one here is actually organized pretty well. So you can see they have indentation for nested items, so you can go in here and find your web elements if you please. Sometimes it'll just, they won't indent all nice like this, right? So yeah, like I said, it's not a science. You have to play around with it. There's a lot of ways to find the element that you're looking for, the elements that you're looking for, but don't think that this process is exclusive to auto logging into websites. This is a driver for a browser, so just about anything you can do on a web page with a mouse and keyboard, you can do programmatically with this. So I added a little bit to the get elements, so you can do some testing programmatically to find the elements that you want to use in another program. You can run them both at once and use one to test and debug. And yeah, so I'm going to turn all of these into individual classes, and I will also include the source for the GUI version. directly from Eclipse. I'm not gonna convert it, make sure it works, but it should, as long as you link in your class path, link the jar file, and make sure you can change this folder here if you want, but make sure that this points to the Chrome driver file that you need as well. Those are the only two files that you need. And like I already showed you, there's a lot of ways to export this for use, for actual, continued use as an application you use every day. So yeah, that about sums up my video. If you're wondering what I've been doing, what I've been running this on, this is my machine I built last semester, I think, or over the winter. So I ordered a bunch of parts. Custom build. It has a DDR3 memory and the AM3 Plus architecture on the CPU. It's an 8370 from AMD. Has 8 cores. You can see there's a radiator on top, so there's fans that blow out the top of the machine. Everything was installed custom, so I overclocked it to like 5 gigahertz. I got a pretty good test bench score, but it wasn't very stable like that, so right now I have it running native at what it was, 16 gigs of RAM. On the back there's 2 SSDs in RAID 0, which is lightning quick file transfers, like half a gig a second if you're like for this video I'm making. And those are both NVIDIA 1080s. So in SLI, you can see the SLI bridge right there. There's some glare to it here, but what I was trying to do was utilize the NVIDIA API, the NVIDIA toolkit. It's getting path locations all over the place, and I couldn't get it to compile. So you have a different compiler for JGrasp and stuff, and that is also linked in your class path. So compiler, right here's your Java JDK files that it found automatically that it's using to compile your Java into bytecode. For C++, it will use the GNU or G++ compiler that I think installs along with dev C++. You can use your own. So there's a compiler for NVIDIA, for Pascal, whatever it is. And I just couldn't get I wrote programs specifically for that, specifically for parallel, and I couldn't get it to compile, so I got to work on getting my paths right. I really think that's an interesting concept, though, because you have like 500 cores in this machine at like 2 gigahertz or whatever, so a lot of I guess you'd call it a teraflop in comparison to frequency, because it's about how many actual maths per second you can do. So I found a program to an example, and it's basically just a function that you pass a couple arrays to, and it adds the arrays. So but it does it 500 times faster, just because it's doing it many times at once. So it's working on that. I couldn't get it to work. If anybody comes across that in their future, please hit me up, because that's something I want to learn. Like you see here, this is going on in the GPU right now. That's a lot of pixels and a lot of information being processed, but it all happens in a parallel way. So that's what I'm doing besides work, and this is the only class I'm taking. So I hope you guys appreciated what I put together here, and if you have any luck with it, send me your projects, your work, because I love seeing what people do. Once you realize how powerful this tool is, I think you'll appreciate it as well. So